everyone, Rabbi Nico here. I just thought I would give a little live video about something that I've been thinking about a lot recently. It's been coming up in some interesting conversations, and it has to do with the validity of the Gospels and the idea of Yeshua fulfilling biblical prophecies and so on. Um, there are these two basic ideas that people keep proposing that I've seen in so many conversations, and I thought that I should say something about them. The first one is this idea that the story of the Gospels, that the whole story is just fiction, just made up by some people, and the other one is that while maybe the story of the person known as Jesus of Nazareth may have been in some parts true, then they fabricated some other parts and tried to make up stories about how he fulfilled certain prophecies, but the claim is that no, he didn't fulfill any prophecies and so on. It really kind of irks me to hear some of these, especially when a lot of the time they're presented in a way that the person is quite making the arguments is quite honestly not ready to hear any kind of arguments to the contrary. They just shut it down and won't listen to it. Now, I don't present what I'm about to present today from any kind of perspective of this will help you win an argument with somebody who is questioning or outright just denying the validity of the Gospels. I honestly do not think that apologetics really win arguments. Rather, I present this so that if you're ever struggling with doubt in your Messiah, dear children, that you may rest assured that your faith is not in vain. So, basically, when I look at the gospel, to a certain degree, I have to look at it, of course, as a rabbi who is studying these things scripturally, but then also as someone who majored in history in college, so I have to look at it from a historical perspective as well. But also as someone who writes fiction, I kind of have to look at it the way an author or a fiction writer would. And I've said this in a lot of in my messages that I've given, and those of you who have seen my messages certainly are familiar with this, that there's so much foreshadowing in what is commonly referred to as the Old Testament, in the Tanakh, that speaks of Yeshua. Now, people may make the argument, oh, but, that doesn't mean that they're prophecies. Well, the thing about the messianic prophecies is the overwhelming majority of what one might consider a messianic prophecy in the Old Testament does not announce itself as such. A couple of them do, but for the most part, you have God talking about his son. You have God talking about the king that he will raise up, or the man that he will raise up, or whatever. It's actually kind of hard to tell what exactly is or isn't a prophecy, and so we have to decide what we will accept as a prophecy sometimes. And some people will say, well, this is a prophecy, but that isn't, and so it just goes on, but ultimately I think that the sheer amount of foreshadowing of Yeshua that you find in the Bible really speaks to the validity of the Gospels in an incredible way. And I say that, again, as a writer, knowing that foreshadowing is one of the hardest things to do, and how much harder it is to do it over the course of thousands of years with various different authors who all never met, never had a chance to sit down and collaborate on this. Because Yeshua's life has parallels to the Garden of Eden story. There are parallels that you can find between what happened with Yeshua and the story of Cain and Abel. You can find parallels in the life of Abraham. You can find it in the life of Isaac, of Jacob, of Joseph. And that's just the book of Genesis. And, then you can go into things like the lineage that's given between Adam and Noah, where if you translate all the names, it translates to God is appointed mortal sorrow. The everlasting God will come down teaching, his death shall bring the suffering rest. That's the gospel. and pretty undeniably so. And even the word Torah, if you look at the word Torah and break it down in terms of the letters in Paleo Hebrew, the Tav is a cross, the Vav is a nail, the Resh is a head, and the Hey, that's a man standing with his arms up like this, which is to say, hey, pay attention. So, hey, look, a guy nailed to a cross, basically. Or, at the very least, cross, nail, man, revealed. And even the name of God, behold the hand, behold the nail, is essentially what it translates to from Paleo Hebrew if you break it down. And that's not even getting into all the parallels in the life of Moses, in the life of Joshua, in the life of Samson. Samson actually parallels John the Baptizer in some pretty amazing ways that if you come to Shabbat or otherwise tune in for the message this Shabbat, you'll see what I'm talking about. And then the life of David comes in, the life of Solomon. There are prophecies throughout Isaiah that we can go to. There are places throughout the Psalms that we can point to how this parallels with Yeshua. But again, that's why it's so odd to me when someone says, oh, this was all just fabricated, or the story was framed in such a way to make it look like it paralleled all these things. And to illustrate why I think that is so absurd, I have a book here that is not scriptural, but I think will illustrate the point. This is the complete works of William Shakespeare, as you see. It's rather a voluminous tome. It contains all of his plays and all of his sonnets. My sister gave this to me one year, and I was very grateful for it. It is a little hard to follow because it is unabridged. There's no footnotes or anything by professors who are trying to explain what it's about. But this is a pretty big tome. Now, imagine if someone who knew Shakespeare pretty well said, I'm going to write a new Shakespeare play. I'm going to write a play and convince everybody that the ghost of Shakespeare wrote this play, right? So they go through and they read the complete works of Shakespeare over and over and over again, everything from, again, the plays right to the sonnets. And what they do is they then write a play that contains all the elements of every one of Shakespeare's plays. Well, maybe not all the elements, but contains elements from every single one of Shakespeare's plays and of his sonnets as well. Some piece of every play and every sonnet that Shakespeare wrote went into this new play that this person wrote, right? And it's all there. It forms a cohesive story with beginning, middle, and end, and is truly in the spirit of a Shakespearean story in every way, and manages to convince more Shakespeare fans than not that it is in fact the newest Shakespeare play, that it was in fact written by the ghost of William Shakespeare. That's absolutely absurd. The idea that someone could take this, every bit of this, and turn it into one play that would capture the spirit of everything that Shakespeare ever wrote and fool that many people is beyond an absurdity. It's that person would have to be superhuman, if not somehow, channeling Shakespeare himself in order to pull something like that off. Because I don't care how many times you've read all of Shakespeare's plays. It's one thing to even know them all by heart, and another thing entirely to come up with a story that fits the stories in the rest of his plays and the language in the rest of his sonnets so perfectly well. Now, I know that, okay, so maybe we're not just fabricating a story completely, because again, some of the arguments against the Gospels being true have to do with the idea that, sure, there was a Jesus of Nazareth figure, but things like the healing and the resurrection and such, those were added on, and then like the miracles were made up, they'll say, and just those sorts of arguments, just that things were exaggerated or things were changed after the fact, but it was based on a true story. Do you know how much harder it would be to write, again, using the example of a Shakespeare play, to write a Shakespeare play based on a real person, a real lifetime, where you can't just make everything up wholesale? You have to use details of a person's life that actually happened and then make it parallel all the Shakespeare plays in some way. There's a little bit of Hamlet, there's a little bit of Macbeth, there's a little bit of Much Ado About Nothing, there's a little bit of Merchant of Venice. To just shove that all in there into one perfect play that happens to surround the life of a person who actually lived. That that's just absurd. Again, if someone were to be able to pull that off, that person would have to be superhuman. So when people say things like, well, the Bible is just fiction, or even just that the Gospels are just fiction, honestly, while I don't think that that's the case, I absolutely think that that is a falsity. I would say that if it is fiction, it's fiction written by God. It would have to be. No human being or group of human beings would be able to pull off something that incredible. And if it's fiction written by God, then any arguments about whether or not it's factually true become a moot point. If God's writing a piece of fiction, we better darn well read it and find out what he's trying to tell us in it. It's I am absolutely in awe of the scriptures, every bit of the scriptures, the Torah, the rest of the Tanakh, the Psalms, the Proverbs, right, the Gospels, the Epistles, Book of Revelation, all of it. It ties together in ways that are incredible. And sure, there are people who have pointed out things that are seeming contradictions, and those certainly are worth looking into and worth studying, sure. But those contradictions are so incredibly small that, again, having written books myself, the number of contradictions that I've had as one author who definitely knows myself in a book that I wrote over the course of 1 year, even after going through and making edits, that is far more than what you will find in the entire Bible. You have little things like the age of certain kings. In 2 Kings it says that he's 8, and then in 2 Chronicles it says that he was 18 at the time of his coronation. Just little things like that. And the fact that the seeming errors are so small, again, speaks to the truly superhuman authorship of the scripture. And people even point out and say, oh, well, the Gospels even contradict each other, because at one point they'll say that the centurion went and spoke to Yeshua about his servant who was sick. And then at another point it says that the centurion sent his servant to speak with Yeshua about another servant who was sick, or sent his messenger, rather, to speak to Yeshua. And they say, oh, well, that's two different stories. Well, it's not, for a couple of reasons. First of all, oftentimes in ancient literature like that, or ancient records of historical events, if a person sends a messenger, then it treats it as if the person had gone themselves to speak. And second of all, are we really to assume that it was only one centurion? Maybe it was two centurions, and one gospel reports one and one gospel reports the other. The contradictions, or seeming contradictions, are so small, really. Any number of book series that you could read that would be fictional, you'll find more contradictions in those. The works of Sherlock Holmes, the Cases of Sherlock Holmes by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. You'll find plenty of contradictions from one case to another that sort of break the canon so to speak, of what's going on with these characters. I it is it is just truly an interesting thing, and I think that anybody who says things like the Gospels are fictional or the Gospels were even just based around a real story, but they twisted things to make it fit the rest of Scripture, I think they're not really thinking it through because of how much foreshadowing there is. I mean, again, just off the top of my head, with Moses, the killing of the babies in Moses' generation mirrors the killing of the babies in Yeshua's generation, and the meeting with God, the Spirit talking to Moses and the Spirit talking to Yeshua, and Moses ready to lay down his life for the people of Israel, similar to Yeshua laying down his life for everybody. And then we go back to Isaac, where even Talmud will tell us that Isaac was willing to carry his own wood and was willing to become the sacrifice at the end, which ultimately he didn't have. He didn't have to. And Kabbalah, the Zohar, things like that will teach you then that that Isaac did actually die, and that he died for the sins of humanity. Again, major parallels there. And you'll have people bring up arguments like, well, there's no evidence of a triune God in the Old Testament. Honestly, with them, I kind of want the opportunity to bring up the idea of the mystery of the three in the Zohar, because in the Zohar it talks about this idea that when you hear the Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, the reason why it brings up God's name three times, or otherwise mentions God three times, has to do with a triune nature of God. That's in the Zohar. That's not just Christian doctrine. So there's a lot there, really. And then even an argument that I've heard recently had to do with the idea that there's no accommodation for the idea that when the Messiah comes, he might show up and do some parts of the prophecy and then leave and do the rest, when he comes back, and say, oh, sure, world peace, I'll just do that when I come back. A lot of people like to make fun of that and say, oh, well, if that's the case, then my uncle could be the Messiah, because he hasn't performed any miracles or fulfilled any prophecies, but he's dead, and, well, he'll do it when he comes back. Well, that seems like a decent argument on the surface. It's more like, okay, no. Did your uncle walk on water? Did your uncle heal the blind? Did your uncle heal the sick? Did your uncle raise the dead? Before then failing to fulfill the rest of the prophecies. There's the first part right there. So much was already fulfilled, and then other parts weren't. But then the idea that the Messiah couldn't fulfill some parts of the messianic prophecies, that he would fulfill some at first and then some later on, and for people to say no, there's no accommodation for that idea, I would say take a look at the promise that God makes to Abraham a little more carefully. God promises Abraham that his seed will be as numerous as the stars and as numerous as the sand on the seashore. And then he promises Abraham that he will live in the promised land with his descendants. That hasn't happened. Abraham never got to live in the promised land with his descendants. He got to be there with Isaac, but that's not the same. That's not the same as living in the promised land with his descendants. So we would have to conclude one of two things. Either God's promise to Abraham didn't come true, which then has all kinds of questions like, okay, well, did God fail to do it? Was God lying? Something like that. Or we would have to conclude that God fulfills prophecies and promises over time. You get little pieces here and there, and a little bit more, and a little bit more. And like the earliest ones are sort of like a down payment, so to speak, or a promissory note to let you know that the others are coming. And then when you receive the next piece of the prophecy fulfilled, okay, now we're one step closer. And then you see the next prophecy fulfilled, and okay, so now we're even one step closer. Which honestly makes me really curious about some of the prophecies of the end times. Have some of them already come true? Have some of them even come true hundreds of years ago? I don't know. I don't like to talk too much about end times prophecy because you can just get caught up in endless speculation. The only thing that I really need to know about the end times is that when all's said and done, God will take care of us. And that Yeshua will reign, the Messiah will reign over the earth. Because, and I can say that with an incredible certainty, because if Yeshua is not the Messiah, then there is no Messiah, in my opinion. Because the idea of such a character, such a person with such a self-sacrificing heart, who won by surrendering, who basically conquered the world by allowing himself to be crucified. And granted, yes, because he conquered the grave as well, but nonetheless, nowhere else in the history of the world do we really see anybody who wins by losing to that degree. And granted, that's not to say that he lost, but from a worldly perspective, it would have looked to everybody like Yeshua had lost, because no one wins by being killed according to the worldly perspective. But he did. He basically conquered the world posthumously, without having to actually physically be there. And that is truly powerful. So, again, the idea of someone writing a play based on this to the point where some of the best Shakespearean scholars in the world would say, okay, let's go ahead and add that to the canon. Let's add that to the next edition of the complete works of Shakespeare. And for there to be more people who love Shakespeare saying, yes, that's one of the plays, than people who love Shakespeare saying, no, that is absolutely not one of Shakespeare's plays. It's an absolute absurdity, and yet that is essentially what happened with the Bible, with the Gospels. There are more people who, out of those people who read any part of the Bible and believe in any part of the Bible, there are more people who believe that the Gospels belong in it than there are who aren't. Plain and simple. And in fact, I would even go so far as to say there are probably more people with Jewish ancestry who believe in the validity of the Gospels than there are people with Jewish ancestry who don't. Now, I know that modern Judaism specifically defines, who is ethnically Jewish on the basis of whether or not one's mother was Jewish, and that's a whole different thing. But if you take that out of the equation and say, okay, well, my great-great-grandmother or great-great-grandfather was Jewish, and you count those people as being ethnically Jewish, I'd venture a guess, and I don't know how to prove it, but I would venture a very strong guess that you have more people with Jewish ancestry who believe in the gospel than don't. And what does that say about the Jewish concept of rule of majority? So, just some interesting thoughts that I'm throwing out there. Oh, I just saw that that Chris is on here. Hi, Chris. Thanks for logging in. Please make sure to go back and watch this from the beginning, because there are quite a few more points. I think you'll enjoy this or be fulfilled by this, I guess, something along those lines. Anyway, for the rest of you, whenever you're watching this, thanks for watching, thanks for listening, thanks for giving me your time. Shalom.